Bonjour. Bonjour à tout le monde. Thank you for being here today. It's Friday. Everybody should be really in a good mood. It's Friday. I know I am. And I'm also pleased to be here. And and I have the privilege of working in the Office of the Chief Science Officer here at the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm speaking to you today from our Innovation Center at 100 Colonnade Road, which is located on unceded Algonquin territory. So, kui, which I believe is hello in Algonquin. I'm sorry if I didn't say it properly. Alors, je tiens d'abord à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles nous sommes ici rassemblés ce matin font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin. Also joining us today via WebEx and on the phone are colleagues from the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg, Guelph, St. High, as well as colleagues from across the region. And Carling Building is joining us via WebEx again today due to some little technical work that's going on in their work. So, welcome. La présentation d'aujourd'hui s'intitule Intégration de réseaux communautaires, comment joindre l'économie collaborative du monde et créer l'emploi de ses rêves. Today's presentation is entitled Community Network Integration, How to Join the Collaborative Economy and Save the World and Create Your Dream Job. I think this is very wonderful. The Office of Chief Science Officer is very pleased to be hosting today's presentation. So for participants in the innovation room here with me, I'd ask that if you have a cell phone or a BlackBerry that you put on mute or silent, please. And for those on the phone, just a reminder to mute your line using *6 and unmute during when we get to the Q&A using *7. I'll remind you again later, but good to know for now. So today's presentation will be largely in English. However, sentez-vous à l'aise de vous exprimer dans la langue de votre choix. Please feel free to use the official language of your choice. Je tiens aussi à vous mentionner que la présentation va être enregistrée. So today's session is being recorded, so we can listen to it at a future date. And I'll now pass it over to Dr. Pascal Michel, who is the Chief Science Officer here at the Public Health Agency of Canada, to introduce our presenter for today's seminar. Pascal?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Diane. Merci beaucoup, Diane. Bonjour à tous. Bienvenue dans cette session de Parlons Santé. C'est mon moment aussi pour vous rappeler que le séminaire Parlons Santé, c'est un lieu sécuritaire pour parler franchement de ce qui connecte la science aux politiques. On est dans un renouveau ministériel ces temps-ci. On doit produire des analyses, des idées par rapport à comment est-ce qu'on peut améliorer la santé publique. Il faut pouvoir essayer de générer ces idées-là dans des conversations telles qu'aujourd'hui. So it is a safe place to ask the questions. My vision for the seminar is always very much engaging. We will do presentation and then question, but your participation, your thoughts, the best thoughts sometimes are those that, I don't get it, or I just, you don't talk to my world kind of thing. So let's try to really be engaging there. We've got, I'm very pleased to have Dr. Jeff Wilson today with us. I'll give you just a few pointers about Jeff Wilson. So first to say Jeff is a veterinarian, so he's got his degree in veterinary medicine. He went to further his studies, pathology and epidemiology with a PhD. If you look at his track record, there's a whole bunch of topics there. Early on, Jeff had a huge appetite to psychology, management, the big thinking of, behind the scene of putting science in action. One of my first conversation I recall with Jeff was on that zone in terms of like taking on the world, for the kind of thing that we're doing. Jeff from 91 to 2007 held a cross appointment between at the start Health Canada, then that became Public Health Agency of Canada, and with the University of Guelph at the Population and Medicine department there. That's where I met him early on in the 90s. Jeff was my PhD supervisor at the time, and at the time, if you recall, we had a new bug in Canada. We had this E. coli that produced a toxin that would kill people, and jack-in-the-box outbreaks and whole that things. And Jeff did it was on the first epidemiological PhD on the topic was Jeff's work there. But it opened doors in connecting disciplines and connecting sectors and thinking big about modifying things that needs to happen in Canada. So I was quite privileged to be in that zone of thinking at the time. what else to say about this? Jeff is very well published. Had done, as a scientist, a whole bunch of papers, but as well in the management type of things, a whole bunch of paper books that he's obviously point at. The thing I was talking to him right before as well is early interest in belief systems. And so one of the major gaps that we have in public health right now onto our prevention, both on the chronic and infectious side, is our ability, our lever to modify behavior. And it takes a lot of thinking to get to do that. And sometimes, quite naively, we think that through knowledge alone or through communication alone, we're going to do it. But there's a much more engaging, a much more organic, and a much more systematic way to do that. And Jeff has been one of the thinker behind there into trying to make sense of how to do that. And of course, Jeff after that went into starting his own career as in the private sector, and now the company that you have is Novometrics Research, and the broad main topic today, although it is hard to tag Jeff with one title, would be social innovation kind of a business. But I think when you look at all of those tags, it does make a trajectory sense for him to engage us at this point in time for the kind of business we have there. And so I think the type of questions you may ask him are so vast about innovation, experimentations, behavior modification, his experience in connecting sectors, his experience in connecting disciplines as well. Way back then, I totally remember him and I walking into, I think for the first time was the Minister of Health at the provincial level, two veterinarians trying to make a point that that E. coli is going to kill. And then 3 years later, we had walked into and that kind of stuff. So, this is the kind of zone by which we need to be proactive, we need to be engaging. And I'm really, really happy to have you today, Jeff. Let me see through my notes here. Am I missing any big things? So, Jeff, you have 25, 30 minutes, roughly. It is a discussion oriented after that, so you can choose accordingly to engage after that. So, with my great pleasure, please welcome Jeff Wilson.
Excellent. Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much. There's no clock in the room, I guess, so I'm just going to get my phone so I can make sure I'm more or less where I am. 111, 1111. That's great. I just get my water. That's great. Okay, I think I'm almost there. Okay, I got my clicker and back. Excellent. Okay, thanks, Pascal. That's outrageous. That's a good introduction. I appreciate that. And we don't need to go too much into the past. I know I actually wasn't much of a supervisor at all. I remember my supervisor. It was kind of like, "Hi, welcome. Here's your desk. Have fun." That was kind of like my. I remember towards the end, I remember you saying, I said to my wife, "I don't think Jeff knows what I'm doing in my PhD," which I did know enough, right? But I didn't really. Anyway, just so you know. Okay, that's pretty funny. Where do I? And I point it anywhere? Okay. Okay. So we've had it. Thank you very much. And it is nice. Friday is great. Kind of relax. We've had a bit of who is Jeff Wilson? Oh, that's better, I guess, eh? Yeah, just there might be a few things. Yeah, so I am going way back in the early 90s, and this is relevant. How I got onto this was I was just kind of learning about entrepreneurship and kind of outside the box thinking. And I'd been in university for 14 years, right? I really liked university, 3 doctorates, whatever. And I got it in my head, I'd maybe better get a job. And so I also got it in my head, and this was particularly bizarre at that time. I got in my head, what you should do is you should figure out what you want to do and do that. And so whereas most of my, other grad students that were applying to jobs that were available, I kind of went, well, I don't really want to go to Ohio or what have you. I want to be a professor in this college. So I said, I'm just going to create my own job. And many people, far smarter and more credentialed than me, thought I was insane, which I am. I'm totally happy to admit I have some clinical affliction. I don't know if it's in the DSM or whatever, but anyway, the end of some spectrum. But so I sent, this is before internet, I sent 100 letters around Canada asking if people would sponsor a faculty position. And 14 of them ended up on John Spica's desk. I don't know if you remember John. So he phoned our department chair, who was, I guess, kind of shocked, because he was one of the guys who said, there's no way you can do this. And he said, I got to meet anyone who can get 14 letters on my desk, right? So I didn't realize I was discovering direct mail. Which later, so long story short, I was John, ended up getting a job. I said, hey, maybe if LCDC at the time puts in half a salary, Guelph put in half a salary. So John said, sure. He had field epi money, so he gave me half a field epi salary. And I went to Guelph and I said, hey, Health Canada is putting in half a salary, so that we made a job. Then I went on, I went, what the heck am I doing? How did I do that? And I went, it must be something like business or something. Like I had no business background. And so I went to the bookstore, and I suddenly saw all these titles around things like psychology, entrepreneurial stuff, sales. And I went, oh, I'm doing something like selling or something like that. So I got on this path to just read everything I could get my hands on entrepreneurial business, and that led to stuff around psychology and belief systems. I found some amazing stuff. I do have a very persistent kind of personality, obsessive, some would say. So I ended up, we got pretty good at getting money. And by using some sales strategy, which is as simple as talking to people who had money and a need and asking what they wanted. And that was basically the strategy. And so we ended up doing that, and things grew. And finally, some of my grad students, one of my grad students, another one was graduate, who's now a prof at Waterloo. She said, Jeff, can you explain to us what you're doing? And I couldn't explain it to myself, let alone to anybody else. But what came out was this book on belief systems, fundamentals on belief systems. So we did that, and about 10 years ago, I was pretty much driving everybody crazy at the university, and so I decided to leave. I'd already started a company and left. And then kind of critically, 4 years ago, we started to see the collaborative economy coming on. I became very interested in how to predict future trends. Turns out it's unbelievably useful stuff. Pascal talked about Walkerton. We could see by trend analysis that something like that was going to happen. And so I did that. Oh, and then I started to see the collaborative economy, and about 4 years ago we developed this model, which we now call community network integration. So my daughter said this morning, you talk too much. Oh, there we go. So Novometrics is our company. It's morphed into a social enterprise, which is really, there's probably a million definitions. This is the one that's on, if you Google it. Ours is an organization. It applies commercial strategies, but not just to make money. It's to create social good. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Part of it is we found for us, if we kept as a company, it made us much more entrepreneurial. And it didn't have things like a board, which tended to be kind of risk averse. NGOs often have that kind of risk aversion. So this allows us to be pretty wild and crazy. Everything we do is legal, just so you know. And but do some cool stuff that a board might say, gee, that sounds, I can't see why you're doing that. So what's in it for you? So for the folks here and at other sites, what we discovered was, what we didn't discover, what I realized after reading people far more brilliant than me. One of them is a guy named Jeremy Rifkin, who wrote a book called it's either the Third or Fourth Industrial Revolution. Certain people have nailed that the thing we're seeing with things like Uber and Facebook and so on, it's just going to explode. They call it the Third Industrial Revolution. They're saying it's going to be, the collaborative economy is going to be more impactful than the Industrial Revolution. And of course, we're seeing it, and many people are wondering, what is this, and how the heck do you navigate through it? So this model that I'm talking about will show you how to do that. It's important for yourselves. For me, it was my kids. It'll help you see what's coming down the pipeline. And personally, it allows you, because the way you navigate this is different, it creates an opportunity to have more freedom, more fun, more impact, more effectiveness, while you're more productive for whoever you're working for. So it is like an onion, though. Just let me see. Yeah, we're not in Kansas anymore. We are not in Kansas. I don't know if you've noticed. We are deeply into change. And but to understand how it works is like an onion. It's a profound paradigm shift, and so you can't see, I certainly can't see, 10 layers into the onion, but I can see 3 or 4. So for people learning about this, don't worry. It's confusing at the beginning, but it becomes to make more and more sense. So I can't explain everything in one talk, but you'll get the idea. So we're not in Kansas anymore. One way of looking at this is that the world is in a point where we're doing multiple experiments around social innovation. That's maybe connectivity. So, and in fairly random, chaotic, uncoordinated fashion. And it turns out these social innovation models can be highly disruptive. So you things like Uber. One way of looking at it is it's basically a social innovation model. Connect a bunch of people who want to drive taxis in cars, people who aren't satisfied with taxis, put on a platform, boom, you completely disrupt a whole industry. Amazon's even more profound. You're seeing crazy politics like Brexit and Donald Trump. I got nothing for or against Donald Trump. I never met him. I just know he's at some level a symptom of what's going on. So we're not in Kansas anymore, and things are changing. This is not something that we're going to escape. I say one thing I came up with was trying to avoid the collaborative economy is kind of like being in the 1990s and avoiding the internet. Good luck. You could go and live in a cave, but for 99.999% of us, it's going to happen. And it's going to be very good. That's the thing. It's going to be very, very, very good. Very good. But if you don't have sort of the perspective and some skills, it can be extremely scary. You can imagine being a taxi driver. Maybe some Uber drivers in the audience. I don't know. So there's two kind of paths. This is a metaphor, but there's two paths. One is kind of the disruptive path. That's the kind of thing we've seen so far. So we've seen disruptive business models like Amazon and so on. That's nothing compared to what people are thinking about. So I don't have dinner with, billionaire magnates and stuff, but I talk to people who do, and it's quite clear there are trillions of dollars on the sidelines that would like to Uberize everything. Everything. All government, all education, everything. And so I don't know this gentleman. I just know, this is the kind of thing that's happening. Here's a guy. This guy's supposed to be the richest person in Hong Kong. That's what it said in the paper. It's probably true, I guess. He's looking at how fragmented Canada's healthcare system and going and saying, we can fix that. It'll be easy. We'll start by building a data platform that everybody wants, and then people say that works so well, they're going to want more and more and more. That's the kind of thinking. Fortunately, it's not going to happen that way. Not on my watch, anyway. It's not going to. Well, and that's a tiny fragment of what's going on. So this isn't meant to scare people. It is very real. People are now, there are corporations, you'll know some of them, who are now kind of going, hey, you notice how the world is all divided up into verticals of countries, nation states being run as verticals and how they don't connect very well? Well, we connect around the entire world. We'll run it for you. That's the kind of thing. The academics, serious academics, are now saying the nation states, the days of the nation state are probably numbered. And we're moving towards something like intersecting networks. It's going to change dramatically. And of course, for the public, what we're seeing is increasing organization of the public. This kind of thing is sort of a symptom of the public saying, hey, we've had enough, and we know that if we go on Facebook and so on, we can organize. And it's going to get more and more. It's not particularly helpful. It does get people's attention, but we have to move to a much more kind of effective model. Is this working okay? Is it, okay, so we have the disruptive approach, and I'm kind of going, yeah, want that, follow that path. What you're going to get is more of the same. It's too stressful for me. It's just, and it's craziness, and it's not part of the world I want to leave for my kids or grandkids or anybody else. So the flip side is collaborative transformation. So it's going to change. Why don't we become more collaborative in a way where everybody wins and we do it collectively? So to understand that, I'm just going to check my time. Am I okay? Okay. Yeah, you know how long my talk is, so thanks, Dan. So in order to understand how this works, it's good to start thinking in terms of how networks work. So I came up, and this has been kind of an emergent process for me in the sense of I didn't know really what this meant. I just started digging into it, started talking to people around the world, started some projects, and I started reading, and bit by bit, we started to understand how this probably works. So this distinction is helpful. How networks interact is helpful, understanding that. So on the left in black, I've defined a thing that I'm calling conventional networks. And by networks, I mean kind of stakeholder networks, so government, academia, business value chains, NGO, the public, and media. The normal stuff that people in government deal with all the time, right? People in industry also deal with it, just from a different perspective. Well, generally, those conventional networks, which we have now, they tend to be highly siloed. Now, it depends where you're standing. You might say, well, they're not siloed at all. I talk to so, and I'm going, yeah, that's true. It's not that they're completely siloed, but compared to where they will need to go, they're highly siloed. And that tends to come from fragmented leadership. So there's if you notice, like for something like climate change, there's no one actually leading the whole thing. Not even government, right? That siloing tends to create these multiple pockets of self-interest, and so everybody's kind of out for themselves, but they're marketing to the world that they're not, right? I don't know if you've noticed that. And that tends to breed suspicion, positioning, rhetoric, right? We see it in the political world, like particularly in the American political world, we just see there's so much rhetoric that it's been named as fake news. No, it's all rhetoric. And it becomes super, and then you get duplication because no one else knows what anybody else is doing, end up doing all the same things, wasting a bunch of money. The results are limited. So then I said, well, we could have, what would an integrated network look like? And I kind of went, well, we have some more integrated networks right now. We call them enterprises. By that I simply mean a company, a government organization, a university. They're just networks. Like PHAC is just a network. But if you look how PHAC works as a network internally, it tends to run much more effectively than PHAC plus a taxi driver plus somebody over in, Vietnam, or they're not nearly as well connected. And I'll talk about why that works and how we've used that thinking to start integrating these distributed networks. So an integrated network, we're moving more to a model that people are familiar with within these enterprise networks. The only difference is, as we'll get to, that the distributed networks are not hierarchies, and they can't be run as hierarchies. So unlike PHAC, where everyone would agree, yeah, it makes sense to have someone in charge and kind of cascade down, in the distributed networks, no one will agree who should run it. Should it be business, government? So the governance structure is quite different. So anyway, in these integrated networks, they tend to be much more connected. There's leadership of the whole. There's a common vision where everybody wins. Like, notice in fact, there's a common vision. Hey, we're helping public health. We're helping our people internally, right? That tends to create trust, transparency, authenticity, and then we can cut out the duplication and we can actually grow the pie instead of kind of competing for resources, which is what's happening now. So out of all that and a bunch of other stuff, we came up with this thing we call Community Network Integration, or CNI. And what it is a systematic process to align stakeholders to create solutions that are otherwise impossible. That's what it is at a high level. We do that, and we'll get more into this, how we do it, by collectively innovating projects that advance the interests of each party. That's the key. Everybody has to win. And then, step by step, we align them into a platform, not an IT platform necessarily, but like a community platform where, say, we start with, like we're doing quite a bit of stuff around AMR across Canada and other parts of the world. So we start with AMR in, say, the beef industry. Then in the beef industry, we link that to greater productivity. Then we link that to biodiversity. So you create a platform kind of approach over time. And you do it under a third-party collaborative governance structure. So we take all these existing institutions and individuals, and instead of fighting, duking it out, we say, let's create like a leadership team that will then engage everybody, and we'll have representation on that leadership team very informally, so it doesn't threaten or disrupt any of the existing power structure. And it turns out when you do that, it works amazing. And I know that people working in PHAC, you'll have a lot of experience in that, in linking your networks together. And a lot of this I learned from having seen that. This just takes that idea and makes it more expansive. So, again, this relates kind of to the onion idea. So we kind of go, so we have integration of networks. How is this different from that? Because in the early days of, I had to kind of, people would say, well, we're already doing that, so why do we need that? And I went, no, we're doing stuff that sounds like that. It's actually not. The words sound the same, but they're not the same process. So one day, this little metaphor popped in my head. So I went, okay, so in the 60s, a man was put on the moon. Now, how did they do that? Well, a bunch of people got together. A lot of different people were coordinated. Scientists, health, rocket scientists. The president got on national television and promoted it. The public became, and all that got a person on the moon. But the key is, it was done under a systematic process where everybody wins. So it's very different to do that compared to everybody quasi-independently firing off rockets and studying men and women and moons and the president getting $1 billion and going on television. If you do that and it's not coordinated under a common process, you don't end up with a person on the moon. And much of what our networks are doing right now are doing that. There's no actual coordination. But it looks like there is, because you could say, well, what do you mean there's no coordination? We have a president and a prime minister. I'm like, yeah, but by necessity, structurally, they're actually looking after their interest primarily. They could have, it doesn't speak at all to their motives. It's just structurally, like the president has to get elected. So they're actually not interested primarily. Their primary interest isn't to pull all this together, and almost nobody has the skill set to do this. That's part of what's going on. So the words can sound the same. One gets you on the moon, one doesn't. So yeah, so it has to be done under an integrated framework where everybody wins through collective buy-in. Okay, so, whoops. I can do that. Here. There we go. Okay, so now with that, and what I found, to understand it for myself and to kind of get people to understand it, you have to use like a narrative to get people kind of down. I used to say down the rabbit hole, but now I'm going, no, it's up out of the rabbit hole, because right now we're in the rabbit hole. Metaphorically, this has a lot to do with, if you've watched The Matrix, it's that kind of thinking. It's different. It's a paradigm shift. So we just said, well, what if we took these distributed networks and we started applying the same thinking as you do to a well-run enterprise? Because they're both just networks. And so we said, and we've done in Canada quite a bit of stuff around AMR, particularly with the beef network. Now that we've got the beef network, people coming on board, now the poultry network and the swine network and all this sort of stuff wants to be involved. And it started at the intersection between agri-food and public health. So salmonella, AMR, all this kind of stuff. Because that happens to be something I knew quite a bit. And not as much as I should, but I have I have some credibility in that area. So we kind of do stuff like go, okay, for the beef network in Canada, how about a common vision that everybody can buy into? Well, a common vision, I won't go in total depth, but something like we develop the beef industry in Canada so beef farmers win, the environment wins, health, like AMR, wins, and the suppliers win. Pharma wins, not by selling things that are harmful in a, using marketing that's not transparent, but actually coming in transparently into the network. Turns out when you even just start that, the right people start to go, that's a good idea. And it kind of takes the beginning part for them to see what's going on. There's a bit of cognitive reframing. So then we just kind of say, well, let's start applying to some leadership to that. And so, well, you've seen good leadership, right? I know part of it's sitting right there. That's good leadership. I know part of it. We kind of oddly co-developed, right, in ideas of how this works just by talking about it, right? So that's good leadership. I know Theresa Tam, and I've heard people talk about her. I go, yeah, everything I'm hearing says that sounds like good leadership. This is not just a plug for Theresa Tam or Pascal, although I heard things like, yeah, she really cares. And I go, that's good leadership. That's good leadership. So we started applying like, well, what if we actually cared about people in the beef network instead of trying to get endpoints? So we did that, and the others are kind of self-explanatory. You can see, yeah, a governance structure, and then an HR component, like who's in the network. Nobody has a clue in anything like its entirety who's in the beef network in Canada. Everybody knows some of the people. So then you start thinking, where do we get resources? How do we share them? How do we drop costs? Blah, blah. The one I did want to mention is this one here, the high emotional energy piece. So what really works, and this comes from entrepreneurial thinking, or that's one place. It comes from it comes from therapy. It comes from entrepreneurship. Any place where you see people getting excited about a result and passionate, right? So we kind of I know I got probably way too much of it, right? I know Pascal has it, but it's kind of more muted, right? It's kind of more has a more reasonable looking face than me. That's why I left, right? Because I gotta go. Okay. So what we started to realize was, yeah, what you want to do is raise the emotional energy of people to things like, hey, we can do this. It would be really fun. It would be really helpful to the world, to our kids. And when you do that, then you really start to get results. And what we started to see was, yeah, in many organizations all over the place, it's just not even known. And in a lot of them, they'll look at you like you're crazy if you say that, even though it's in all the literature, in their own literature. So that's one piece. And then the other piece was, so the business structure, and not business in the sense of like corporate, it's like business as applied to any organization. The other is using some social psychology. So part of the trick is, okay, we want to bring these network players together, but they're all disparate. They don't talk to each other. Many of them in the corporate world, they come from an environment where they're taught from like day one, it's dog eat dog. You got to kill the competition, right? Well, you can see where this is going. And you can see why it's gotten us to where we are, in part, right? Politics is the same way. I got nothing against politicians. I'm just saying they're trapped in a paradigm. So there's a whole bunch of this, and as Pascal said, I wrote a book on this. Can't go into detail today, but there's some amazing stuff on this. And my thing, and it's extremely powerful, my thing is to make it transparent. So yes, when I construct a PowerPoint like this, it's got some pretty powerful engagement psychology built into it. I don't even think about it anymore. But I did write a book on it, and anybody wants one can have one for free, and you can see exactly what I'm doing, as opposed to some corporate entities or others who are used exactly the same stuff but pretend they're not, right? And I'm kind of, again, nothing against them. I'm just going, in this world now, we must have transparency around this. And we must teach our kids what this looks like. So one of the pieces is just very simply, in beginning to align networks, what we did was we said, let's go across the networks, because we don't want to leave people out. Often what happens is corporate does its side, and government and university and NGO does its side. And each says, well, we are highly collaborative. And I go, yeah, but you've missed an entire... So we brought them together, but we did it by identifying people, individuals in the different areas who are what we call high early adopter collaborators. So they have a psychological propensity for collaboration. They're already collaborative. Many of them, when you talk to them, they're the ones when they were kids, they were in the family going, everyone stop. Surely we can get along. This kind of stuff. So we brought those people on. And when you bring those people together across the networks, they're completely fed up with all the fighting or the whatever, just suboptimal results on behavior. You bring them together, and they start having some discussions, and it's amazing what starts to happen. So we're now kind of 4 years into this, and this is what we're seeing. There's lots more. Diana, 10 minutes? Okay. For government, what are the benefits? Well, you can see who's involved. What this means is, under this process, imagine a process where you have all your stakeholders that you need in as full partners, people not taking pot shots at you or whatever, right? Actually engaged. You can imagine the lifestyle of that, right? Just the feeling of it in the work environment. And what tends to happen is co-funding opportunities come out, major ones, co-resourcing opportunities. Your policy options are not done, they're done collaboratively, so you get buy-in right from the beginning, so people aren't complaining about a policy because they actually help to co-create it. So many, and then at the end, for government, it's like nothing but a giant good news story. We came together in a leadership role to bring all these stakeholders together to find things that simultaneously create health, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And it works. You might, if you think he's on crack or something, I'm actually not. You might go, could this possibly work? And I go, yes. And part of what I think is to kind of invite people in and say, yeah, come in and see how this actually works and how it can be applied to what you're doing. This one is kind of for people individually in the room or on the phone or what have you, WebEx. When you do this, you start to realize the traditional economy, including government and so on, it's run under what I'm calling here managed economy. There's an implicit belief that time is limited. There's never enough time. There's never enough money. We don't have enough people. I can't get my boss to whatever. I can't get my stakeholder. it leads to a thing going, the thing that actually gets results is just buckle down and work harder and harder and harder and harder. And of course, people burn out. And it turns out, not only does modern business practice say that's actually totally backwards, it's just we've all bought into it. The modern neuroscience says it's backwards. So in the empowered economy, time is not a problem. Budget is not a problem. It becomes a mindset, and you enter into kind of like a flow state. Like if you've ever been in like playing sports or something, and you're just like I'm totally non-sporty, so I'm thinking Wayne Gretzky, when he's doing that thing with the hockey, it's like, right? He's 3 steps ahead, and he goes, how did you do that? He probably has no clue. He just felt right. Yeah. So that's where we go, and then results just radically improve. So that's the modern neuroscience. How many minutes have I got left? 5 minutes. There's going to be opportunities to see how this works, but at a high level, what we do is we got it down to a 7-step process. Everything I do for some reason comes down to a 7-step process or a 3-step process. We map the stakeholders. We find out in the network who's involved. So in the beef network, we kind of went, who in Canada needs to be here? We engage the early adopters. Find the early adopters, kind of by feel, talking to people. We don't tend to worry too much. What's the formal process? Like, should we make sure this and this and this and this are at the table? Like, no. Let's generally get people across. It's much more relaxed, which of course makes it much easier to get buy-in. We engage the early adopters by just finding out, what do you want of them? And then committing to help them get it. Then we create little leadership teams, and we've done this for a whole bunch of things now. AMR between Canada and U.S., Lyme disease, pet wellness. We're now doing a bunch of community projects. And I'll show you a map. This is happening now all over the world. This is an exercise in be careful what you wish for. Then you start doing pilot projects that address people's needs. And the engaged community together develops the pilot projects. Over time, you'll find the industry people are talking to the government people and the academics, and they're like laughing, having beer. Beer plays a fairly heavy role in all this. Helpful. Yeah, so you've heard a little bit about the, I got to talk a little bit about the AMR stuff. If I just do this for 2 seconds. Yeah, so what this looked like with AMR in Canada, we started thinking about, this is like 3.5 years ago, we started thinking about who should we talk to. So we say, well, some professors and some government people and PHAC, and we talked to Richard Reed Smith and Dave Leger and people like that, and Rebecca, this kind of thing. The first 2 people we talked to, they were a very senior industry guy in AMR and a very senior academic. And they basically said, Jeff, you are completely ridiculous. You are irrelevant. You don't know anything about AMR, which is pretty much true. You know, I know a bit. There's very important people around the world. There's 200,000 papers published on AMR. Thank you very much. The third guy I talked to, who I will name, Eugene Jansen at the University of Calgary. He's a professor. He's like an elder statesman of beef clinical medicine. Anyway, such a thing exists for people who don't deal with that. So he goes, Jeff, I think it's a no-brainer. There's no coherent leadership of the AMR enterprise in Canada. There's groups organizing their part. And then it just started to take off. And then Merck came on board, then Nutreco, then a bunch of other universities. We created our little leadership team. Now they've come together, and we do this by Skype if they're by distance. And what they want to do now is map the entire beef network for Canada. That's their first project. Nutreco then said, Nutreco is one of the big agri-food companies. It's supposed to be the largest in the world. They own Suregain and that kind of thing in Canada. That's like a small one of their holdings. They said, we want to use this for eradication of human salmonella in poultry in Canada as the pilot project. So you can see how this is kind of, now Maple Leaf Foods, I just talked to a couple of vice presidents from Maple Leaf Foods. They want to be involved. it's because of the structure. There's a business structure and a psychological structure to this. And that's probably tons. I have one other example with honeybees. This is the first one we did. Same sort of thing. The honeybee network, particularly in Ontario, is highly fragmented. There's huge concern about what's causing these honeybee die-offs. And part of this is kind of split in half. Half the network thinks it's these neonic insecticides used on corn. They've got all their literature that says it's true. Half says no, it doesn't. It's something else. No one had ever. This is great for this group. So no one had ever done an epidemiologic study of honeybee decline in Canada ever, and they're trying to decide what's causing honeybee decline. Well, I went to them. I said, public health has been doing this for 200 years. I can tell you exactly what they would laugh at. They would actually chuckle to think that you're trying to solve this issue without understanding the field data. So we talked to Bayer and Monsanto and the beekeepers, and we mapped the network, and brought these groups together, and we did a little, quite a nice epi study. And we got all these different people to kick in data, money. Health Canada was very helpful. PMRA kicked in some data. University of Guelph came on board, and we did a very nice epidemiologic study. Elisa Guthrie, who was one of my PhD students. And to my surprise, there was no evidence of a relationship between corn proximity and decline at all. None. It was everything that popped up was management. So it looks, though, on a first wash, probably the likely main cause is management. I'm not saying it's not neonics. What I said was, it illustrates we have to come together around this. There's no way we're going to solve this. And so what happened then was the Canadian Honey Council came on board, the apiarists in Saskatchewan and Alberta came on board, and now we're building kind of a national platform around this. And to the platform point, they're going, well, what about other pollinators? Because it's not just about honeybees. And then the Canola Council said, well, we want to work on all biodiversity in agri-food areas. Well, we're doing a bunch of stuff in Africa, and now we're linking people in South Africa to do biodiversity. And then we can go after collaborative funding globally. So that's a lot of information, but it gives you an idea of how fast this works, how it's kind of nonlinear, and the kinds of opportunities that are on the table. This shows you we're doing a bunch of stuff around the world. This is the kind of people that come on board. Big business, small business, provincial government, state government, people around the world. And the final thing is, I would say, it's kind of like the internet. This is not something we're going to avoid. It's going to happen. It's a massive social movement, and the collaborative economy, that is. The economic benefits of people coming together are so huge. The ability to solve things like climate change and the ability to actually improve people's individual lives are so great. It's just going to happen. So that's why I'm kind of like now some visionary evangelist, right? Please, join us. And I think that's probably about it. Thanks, guys.
Keep that with you. We're going to go to Q&A.
Yeah. Okay.
So thank you very much. That was a very interesting and thought-provoking conversation. I had the privilege of seeing the slides before, but you definitely brought the slides to life for us, Jeff. So we're going to open the floor up now to some questions. Alors, sentez-vous à l'aise de poser les questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. We'll start with a few here in the room. If anybody, just put your hand up, and either you can come to the mic, or we'll take WebEx questions as well. So those joining us virtually, please feel free to type in your questions. They'll be relayed to us. So any burning questions in the room here at 100 Colonnade?
I have one.
Oui, allez-y.
I'll take that privilege as you move the microphone elsewhere. Actually, one of the privileges of having many conversations with you, Jeff, is that I can quote things that you've said 10 years ago. And we saw the rising of AMR, saw the rising of a whole bunch of mess in the food safety stuff saw the arrival of West Nile virus and all this. And you and I were reflecting and in a chuckle, actually, I must say, but it had some roots to that. This is like the way the federal government reacts to those challenges two ways all the time, and there's a common way there. Creates a database and creates a committee, right? So there's a desire to centralize the information hub, and there's a desire to put some people in charge of the committee. Like, name it, we're going to rack by creating a committee and creating a database. So two questions for you. How do you feel about that now? Has that changed, or is that still applicable for a subset of challenges that we have, or is this not relevant anymore, that kind of a view?
Well, so first of all, I was working at PHAC, and I see a very different place now. I'm not sure it's because I grew up or all of us grew up. It's probably a combination, but it is change, and this is symptomatic. Like we're having these conversations. So one thing I'd say is that what people in the world want are solutions. They actually want solutions. And so if you take something like AMR, what the network wants is, at some level, a solution to AMR that works for everybody. So those kind of solutions consist of things like, let's find out, get to the database thing. There's definitely a role for kind of saying how much is there and so on. But now that we have quite good data on how much AMR there is out there, right? We really do. People are saying, and we have a vast, well, for that kind of public health, a vast literature. Like I was at one of these AMR meetings for the National Institute for Animal Agriculture, which is, they're in Washington. They're a big group, all these big players are there. And somebody stood up, an academic guy, and he said, I just did a quick review. There's been 200,000 papers on AMR published in the last 8 years. We do not need more data. What we do need to do is now take this and get started on it. So that, I think, is challenging for everybody in the network because they don't know what to do because it requires collaboration, right? And so that's where the small, scalable pilot projects come. It's actually, the language is very significant. Small, scalable, and then scale them. So there's a huge interest in for AMR in the agri-food industry in devising those solutions, which would, and testing them empirically. There's a huge need for the kind of skills that are here and in CFIA and stuff. It's just kind of probably take some of the effort that's going into surveillance and apply it to things like systematic review of what we already have. Do an enumeration of the databases we already have. I can tell you right now, because I've been told by people who know, there's data sitting in like 3 or 4 databases that have been done on beef AMR, and if you just connected them together, much of the answer would be there. And it's all been paid for, and it costs millions of dollars. So that data was useful, and to continue to get it as useful. I think it's just sort of a transition to those kind of projects. And the small is important because it lowers the risk. Small, little bit of money, try a little bit of a new thing. Is that sort of helpful? That's how I kind of.
Thank you, Jan.
We have one in the room here. Do we have any WebEx questions, please? Not yet? Okay. Please feel free to send them in. Oh, we have one now.
There we go. Yeah.
Ask and you shall receive, eh?
Totally.
So from Rita, great presentation. Hope there's another presentation that deals with a little bit more examples. Is there any reference material?
So right now, and this is at the point where we're building that reference material, like kind of reference and training material, let's say, right? Experiential learning materials, probably. So the best one I have right now is we did a video. There's a 26-minute video that explains this. This presentation is built off of that, but it's shareable also, which is helpful. And so now what's happening now is, as this grows, and it is growing pretty rapidly, like it's at some weird inflection point. So I'm writing a second book, about halfway through it, and which describes, it goes into more detail around all this kind of stuff. How do you actually do it, and more examples of that. So as things speed up, and also as we're kind of into the modern economy, we're kind of going, okay, so let's take the book and instead of waiting, another year to get it done, let's take the chapters in kind of rough format, put it out to the network and say, guys, what do you think? Or maybe we do it as a blog pieces or whatever. It gives you an idea. Yes, we recognize that. We're being asked for it. And what we'd like to do is share that with the community to go, here's what we're doing. Does this make sense? A next step would be, what are you doing? Do you see some applications of this? Can we build that out as a project? Can we get some interns? Can we get some next level funding? I hope that's helpful anyway. So that's where we're going.
Jeff, we're going to link to that video.
Excellent.
Thank you.
If we could.
So
we'll link to your video.
Page. Yeah. So I know we had another question in the room. I just want to check quickly. Is there a question on anybody else on WebEx? You can send them in to Lena, but go ahead in back of them.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation. I actually have 3 quick questions.
Go for it.
The first one is...
Do them one at a time, that's all, because I'm...
Okay. Well, the first one has to do with regards to the stakeholders and mapping stakeholders, and if you could elaborate on the role of the voluntary sector and interest groups.
Yes.
Kind of more on the grassroots side of the equation, right? Because I think
totally
what came up to me was a lot of kind of the business side, academics, and government, and I'm sure this other element is already there. But I just wanted to have your thoughts on that.
Go for it.
My 3 quick questions, and then I'll be quiet.
Might have to remember.
The second one has to do with when it comes to evidence, and I heard you talking about data research, which is kind of hard, kind of the hard evidence that we much love here in the agency. But also I'm wondering about like traditional knowledge and kind of less kind of Western type of knowledge. So also your thoughts about that in terms of building practices and addressing issues based on lines of evidence that are not necessarily
like traditional numeric.
Like our traditional.
Exactly.
Our traditional.
Totally.
And the last one has to do with I'm wondering your thoughts about the concept of the integrated networks and what learnings would be out there for us to learn at the agency, given the vast landscape of partnerships and things that we have, starting with the public health network.
Totally.
That's a big one.
But
there are also many others that are present across programs, and those are partnerships. You could see those as, based on what you presented, you could see those as networks. So I'm wondering what kind of lessons or things we could take into account as we work with those partners.
So they're great. And first question was yes. So really important part in the whole mix for sure. And as this emerges, it's kind of growing. It grows like a spiral, right? And so in our initial phases, some of the non-governmental type groups that were the most relevant, as far as we could see, were things like associations. So like the Beekeepers Association, the commodity groups, this kind of stuff. We're in the process now as it expands. A lot of this has been some bizarre giant proof of concept thing, right? And now we're going, we don't need proof of concept. This works. And so bringing in those kind of advocacy groups is kind of a next level. I'm trying to think if I'd have to actually go, there's so many that I'd have to think about it. But for example, we are now working with kind of informants to First Nations issues. So we've been asked about that. And a lot of this happens, it's very kind of non-linear, and a lot of it is built on existing relationships. So one of the people that we're working on there is a lady that I met a few years ago, and she's Métis, and she runs the Métis genealogical website. So she's now, and she's a professional marketer and social media expert. So she's also a cat lover, and she's helping us with the small animal, the companion animal stuff. So all this to say, very important. So across all of these different things. The second question was, I just forgot. Yeah. So you mean traditional, like as in First Nations, Indigenous knowledge. So yeah. So I'm like a self-styled kind of non-expert on a million things, right? I'm kind of like some bizarre polymath or something, right? And definitely one of the drivers of this has been me understanding the psychology of this better and better. Well, when you understand the psychology and then you get to write a book, or you end up writing a book about belief systems, pretty soon you start to realize beliefs are at some level arbitrary. Then for me, I started reading about consciousness because I'm a scientist. I had to approach it that way, right? And then I came out the other end and had not really a nervous breakdown, but kind of reached my late 40s and a crisis of consciousness. And I ended up working with a spiritual advisor, and she showed me stuff that totally blew my mind. And with that, so part of this, I personally have a huge practical interest in all that kind of stuff. And as we work with my friend and so on, who's now helping to reach out, very, very interested in that. And it turns out somebody gave me a book on using democracy circles, right? All of what we're doing is actually defined within traditional practices already. Does that kind of make sense? So that at many levels, absolutely. And what was the last one? It was... And the data, or is it data? What was the last one exactly?
About the Public Health Network.
Very applicable to the Public Health Network. And we're already working with a bunch of different people in it. And not only kind of a traditional public health network, but if you read a bit about determinants of health, which I'm not an expert in, but I get it, right? I'm going, everything is public health, right? This iPhone is public health. The economy is public health. So connecting those networks in as well, and it turns out with a bit of business knowledge and a bit of meditation, you can see how to bring in, like we're now in our community projects, I've already talked to Royal Bank, CIBC, Walmart, basically any major company and retail group in Guelph, and they all go, I'm good at pitching it. I show them how their interests can be served. So they're very interested because they're out there going, how do we actually help with health? And they got no clue. So they give a bunch of money to the United Way, which I'm nothing against the United Way. It's just it's not as united as where we can help. Is that helpful? Excellent. Thanks.
Jeff, we could be here all day with you, and we wish we could. Unfortunately, our time is at an end. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you again for your presentation. It was wonderful to have you here with us today. The materials, so Jeff's presentation, as well as the link to the video and possibly to the book, we'll put on our GCpedia page. So what would be really helpful for us is for people who are interested, if we could find out who those people are and kind of go, I'd be very delighted to have some conversations. And what's that now? Your email's up there. Yeah, but in a little, maybe talk to Pascal in a little more structured way, right? Does that make sense? Figure it, and then we'll come back to people. People who raise their hand are almost always the early adopters around this kind of stuff, right? They make sense. But no obligation. No obligation. So the material will be on our GCpedia page, and maybe just another round of applause for Jeff. Thank you very much.